and welcome back to Analog Slop, where two music industry lifers revisit the enemy and melody maker of their youth, which in our case is the 90s. We're exploring artists we discovered as wide-eyed teenagers, only to disown as sneering 20-somethings. Now, unshackled from our hipster baggage, we dive deep into the pre-digital age to look back on a time when music news came but once a week. My name is Graham Best. I've worked in music publishing and music tech for over 20 years.
And my name is Adam Bushell. I've been a music supervisor for 20 years.
Each week, one of us will read the NME, one of us will read the Melody Maker, and we will pick out the most interesting stories and discuss them.
This week is the 9th of December 1995. We look at Radiohead in their Benz era, BritPop in America, Melody Maker look back at Husker in 1995, and Shaq, the big star of the BritPop era. Welcome to Analog Slop. This week, we will be looking at the 9th of December, 1995. Once again, I have the NME, Graham has the Melody Maker. Even though we're late in the year, and we're obviously very close to the kind of bumper Christmas issues. So you think it would be quite light on news. This is quite a stacked week in terms of interesting stuff in this issue. On the cover is Tom York of Radiohead with the headline, Tom York gets stressed for success. In the news section is a kind of continuation of the Blur versus Oasis thing, which is there was a piece which is also teased on the cover, which is titled Blur and Oasis Give Peace a Chance, which is effectively about Damon and Liam exchanging kind words at the MTV Awards in Paris. And perhaps quite tellingly, all the quotes come from Damon Albarn rather than Liam Gallagher, whose band is starting to leave Blur behind in terms of impact and relevance. There is a interesting, but I didn't cover it, 3-page interview with Def Jam's Russell Simmons.
Ooh.
On bands this week are Spain, Mexican Pets, and Pusher Man. Graham, do you remember Pusher Man?
Roughly, but the on band that is closest to my heart is Mexican Pets, who I loved dearly.
Pusher Man are a 6-piece kind of.
6?
Yeah, I know. They sound.
What were they all doing?
Yeah, I know. They sound a lot like the Verve, so maybe they had that kind of shoegaze 2-lead guitarist thing, but early Verve kind of. But I had a quick listen to them. It's really funny because the pieces they're so full of this kind of Oasis-esque bravado about how they're going to break America, and you just listen to the tracks, you're just like, what the God's name are you talking about? This just does not sound like it's going to translate well at all, but clearly in 1995, that's what people wanted, and lots of it. It's kind of sort of empty guitar rock maximalism. But unfortunately for them, it's like they never kind of move forward. So it sounds kind of underproduced. Anyway, there's a piece titled Beyond Britpop by Keith Cameron, where he kind of surveys the current state of US underground rock, principally our old friends Rocket from the Crypt. There is an interview with Andy Bell from Erasure, not Ride. Baby Bird are interviewed. Stephen Jones from Baby Bird, and also China Drum get like a 2-page article. China Drum, did you know this? In 1995, they made the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, where they are called Artist of the Year.
What? No, I didn't know that. I know one of our listeners is a massive China Drum fan, so he will probably know this.
Okay, all right, fine. I mean, I owned that album that was out around that time. I don't remember it. I don't understand why it would get US rock critics into a state. I don't know. It just seemed like a kind of pleasant pop punk album with the standout track being the cover of Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush.
Not to be too scathing, but it's wild to me that China Drum would have that spot when Snuff exist.
In the year of 1995, you could have put lots of different bands from the UK on the cover.
Okay, so I've thought about it, and I can start to see a train of logic in terms of that kind of mall punk explosion in the US with Green Day and The Offspring.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Britpop being a hype, like in the US, at least in industry circles, someone putting two and two together and like thinking, what if you had pop punk but British?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I'm sure we'll return to them at a later date. Stone Roses are back. They are the main live review. And also of note, Wigfield's cover of Last Christmas by Wham gets single of the week. Good trolling by the enemy there. Graham, what's going on in the Melody Maker?
So if we had a Britpop bell, we'd be ringing the shit out of it. Worth pointing out, I know you touched on this briefly. This is the same month that produced our character building rundown of the Enemy and Melody Maker's top 50 albums in 1995. So if you've heard those episodes, you know we are at maximum Union Jack chimney sweep intensity. So anyway, I've got a Blur and Oasis cover. Specifically, side profile headshots of Damon and Liam facing up to each other in the fashion of boxers.
Excellent Photoshop work there on that cover, I can see.
Yeah, they did a surprisingly good job. And the big question on the cover is, will they make it in America? It's a Britpop in the USA special. We'll find out. Also trailed are live reviews of the Stone Roses, perennial Melody Maker Whipping Boys Teenage Fan Club, Breeders' side project The Amps, and also Dubstar. And right at the bottom of the front page, we've got Morrissey Walks Out on Bowie Tour,
Yeah, I saw that.
positioned right above Martin Rossiter on the New Jean single, which is a witty bit of front cover arrangement. In terms of notable news pieces, there's a lot going on, but not a lot which is kind of really substantial. There's a decent sized box on Team USA 2026 Winter Olympics mascot Snoop Dogg's trial for accessory to murder. That had just started in LA, and that is a very dry, factual kind of like record of the statements in court. There's no reference in the piece to any new music, which, you know, if you know what the Dog Father sounds like, is fair enough.
It'd be interesting to go into that in more depth through the lens of Murder Was the Case.
You know what? I always forget that like that project exists between Doggy Style and the Dog Father. I'm fuming that I didn't think of that entire project existing because I was just looking like online last night and I was like, wow, 3 years between Doggy Style and the Dog Father.
Yeah, what was he doing? Yeah.
I then went down a rabbit hole about production credits on the Dog Father, which don't include a single Dr. Dre production, which sort of misses the point. Anyway, moving on. Noel Gallagher turns up as a surprise support act at Paul Weller's Two Nights at Brixton Academy. He literally just appears unannounced to do solo acoustic spots as a uncredited support. He then also comes out on both nights for the encore of Paul Weller's set to play "Come Together," which had just been released around the Help War Child album under the Smoking Mojo filters, who we talked about before.
Yeah, with Paul McCartney, yeah.
Yeah, basically everyone's disappointed that Paul McCartney doesn't show up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Weller fans never satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to go off on a tangent completely about Smoking Mojo filters, but it occurred to me last night that it is odd that you would get McCartney in to collaborate with kind of two like well-known Beatles fans, and then you make them all sing a Lennon song.
Oh, yeah, that does seem odd. But had he gone full revisionist Beatles history yet? Like in terms of this is some time before he's like, can we change the writing credits around from Lennon and McCartney to McCartney Lennon on some of these? Alphabet be damned. I wrote more of this
Yeah.
song than he did.
It's a good question. Like 95 is the same year the Anthology TV series and compilations come out, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they just did the 30th anniversary package last year.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the single reviews in this week's Melody Maker is Free as a Bird.
Anyway, other Melody Maker stories we won't be discussing this week include what I would describe as an unusually neutral review with Teenage Fan Club in Spain, which is paired with an entirely standard Melody Maker pasting of Teenage Fan Club in the live reviews.
Yeah.
So fair enough. Interesting piece on drum and bass enigma Alex Reese and his graduation from Metalheads to Island Records for an album project. Alex Reese, obviously the producer behind Pulp Fiction, which is kind of like one of those absolute sort of tentpole drum and bass records, pretty much invents liquid drum and bass. I decided to stay away from this because some of the rumors around his career and that transition from Metalheads to Island are absolutely hair raising. There's a piece on the rising influence of Pet Sounds era Beach Boys on US Indie that features Papas Fritas, Spain, and Built to Spill. Built to Spill also walk away with single of the week. There is, surprisingly, a half-page piece on Francois K launching his own label, Wave, which felt surprisingly progressive. There's a big double-page feature on Blur on tour in the USA, and then there is a single-page kind of introduction slash setup interview with Baby Bird.
First thing I want to talk about this week is one of the lead reviews in Long Play, which is the album review section of The Enemy. It's on page 39. It is titled Prefab Route, and it is about the second album from the band Shack called Water Pistol. Do you know much about this album or this band, Graham?
I remember the sort of train wreck career myth around the band. Is this the album that was supposed to come out much earlier and didn't?
Yes, well, we're gonna get into that. But, yeah, I just wanted to kind of take the temperature of your awareness on this band and Michael Head and, this album, but it's good. You kind of have a kind of working knowledge of it, kind of same as me, really.
I don't want to I don't want to like tread on your toes here, but from memory, like in the mid sort of 90s, like kind of 94 to 98, he was almost like a Lee Mathers stand-in. It's like
Yeah,
resident lost genius.
yeah, we're gonna get into it. As I said, the Liverpool band Shack are releasing their second album, Water Pistol. It was recorded in 1991, but it is now only just being released in late 1995 on the German indie label Marina Records. At this time, Shack are brothers Michael and John Head, Peter Wilkinson, more on whom later, and Ian Templeton. Shack are the band Michael Head formed after the dissolution of 80s band The Pale Fountains. You ever dug into The Pale Fountains, Graham?
No, the name is known to me. And again, I remember some of the myth. It's like their songs were incredible, their production was awful,
Yeah.
but that's about it.
Okay. Well, here we go. I think it's fair to say that Michael Head is to UK music journalists of this decade what Chris Bell and Alex Chilton were to US music journalists of the 70s.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. He is seen as a genius who is not getting his due, beset by bad luck and bad drugs. This might amaze you. The Pale Fountains were signed for a staggering £150,000 by Virgin Records in 1981.
What?
This is a staggering amount of money.
Also, how old is this guy?
He's born in 1961. So
Okay.
yeah, he's 20 in 1981 and sort of in his mid-30s by the time Shack are kind of getting going again. Pale Fountains released two albums. They're kind of a mixture of indie pop, jangle pop, and crucially chamber pop. the first thing you realise when you listen to it is they are super heavily influenced by Burt Bacharach. But then when you kind of think about it a bit more, you're like, there's a real key influence here, and that is Arthur Lee and his band Love.
Yes.
And in fact, in 1992, Shaq were Arthur Lee's backing band when he toured the UK. So it's kind of a real Wonder Mints, Brian Wilson scenario there. Personal note about the Pale Fountains. I have dug into these two albums. Yeah, they kind of swing between genius and boring for me too regularly to ever have really gone all in on this band. But there are some tracks that I think are amazing. But yeah, you're right. The production is not great. And th- there's kind of an overwhelming sense of a lot of this stuff where I'm just like, I don't get it. This is not connecting with me the way that I feel like it should. But then again, one track will play and you'll just be like, this is absolutely amazing. I think if you were a UK music journalist seeing them live in the UK in the 80s, you'd probably be like, these are my guys. Do you know what I mean? Like, I like the reference points. I like what they're doing, you know.
That's a really interesting perspective on it as well, because the nature of seeing them live means that you're not hobbled by 80s production that might not benefit the songs that much.
That is exactly the thought I had whilst walking around re-listening to these two albums a few days ago. The Pale Fountains were not successful. They split in 1987. The legend kind of begins to grow there. That same year, Mike Head forms the band Shaq. In 1988, they released their debut album Zilch on Ghetto Recording Company, which was Ian Brody's record label. This album is also not successful.
I'm guessing the advance was smaller.
Yeah, significantly smaller. So they quickly record the follow-up, Water Pistol, which is beset by an almost impossible to believe set of bad luck circumstances, which I'm going to list for you now. So number one, Star Street Studio, the studio in London where they record the album, burns down, destroying the master tapes. um, I'm laughing now because it's so long ago and he's gone on to have a successful career. So, you know, I'm sure he can look back on this wryly. Now, shortly after the fire, the label Ghetto Recording Company goes out of business, leaving them without a functioning release path, even if they had the recordings. Next, turns out album producer Chris Allison has a backup tape of the album on DAT, except he's gone to America, taken the tape with him, and left it in a hire car. And the tape is assumed lost forever. Meanwhile, get ready to have your mind blown in Liverpool music incestuousness. Peter Wilkinson, the bassist, leaves the group and joins John Power's new band, Cast.
I know it's easy to say this with hindsight, but I thought that name rang a bell.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was the bassist in Cast from like 91 up to when they split. Yeah, so he's like a kind of founding member of Cast. Then the band break up. Michael Head falls into a long bout of depression and heroin addiction. And then, somewhat improbably, the DAT is found by the car hire company and returned to the producer after much kind of phone calls and badgering. This seems amazing, but anyway, that's what happened.
That feels ludicrous in a kind of pre-internet age.
Yeah, and I think the way I just read that sequence of events, I think there's been some kind of jimmying with the timeline there, and it's been, you know, it's been kind of laid out like that to kind of make the legend seem
maximum
more
impact.
legendary. Yeah, exactly. I don't know whether maybe the band split after the tape is found or whatever, but anyway, the story's better if you tell it that way around. So 4 years later, in October 1995, the album is finally released. The Enemy loved this album. It's reviewed by Ted Kessler. He gives it 9 out of 10. His praise is like breathless. He describes it as nestling somewhere between what the second Stone Roses album should have sounded like and the sound Lee Mavers hankered after for the Lars' first album.
I'll take the bait, Ted.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really sound like the Lars. They have that kind of classic songwriting thing, but they're so that kind of psychedelic folk aspect of love that is so prevalent that they lean more on that than the stuff that Lars lean on from the 60s.
I feel like when people reference Arthur Lee and Love as an important influence or a reference point, there's a degree of scrutiny that is required to that claim. It's like, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that you sound and are influenced by Forever Changes? Or do you mean you sound and are influenced by the career of Arthur Lee? Because they're two different things.
I think they are influenced by, yes, Forever Changes, but peak love. Like you hear that you hear these records, you can just hear it all over it. It's in the Pale Fountains, they really wear it on their sleeve. It's like the Burt Bacharach love thing is like right in your face, certainly with the first album, and the kind of jangle indie thing is like behind that. It's almost like they flip that around for Shaq, which I'm going to get into because I think there's an interesting genre thing happening and an interesting thing happening in terms of the times when these records are made and when they're actually released. Michael Head later mentioned that the influences for Water Pistol were the Stone Roses, the Charlatans, and Flowered Up. The album does sound like this if you remove all trace of dance and baggy, which which weirdly leaves you with quite a traditional Britpop 1995 sound.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like Cast or the Seahorses, but with a more kind of early 90s vibe and a love influence throughout.
I was going to say, like, that description, and it is decades since I've attempted to listen to this album, but that description makes me think of like something kind of quite Britpoppy, but much lighter on its feet.
It's too good to call proto lad rock. With the third album, HMS Fable has a clear Oasis influence to the production on some tracks. But going back to what you just said, it's yeah, lighter on its feet is exactly right. It's like it's too sensitive and folky, and as I say, the kind of sensitivity kind of sets it apart from the the kind of bludgeoning blokishness that was kind of around in some of these bands at the time. That's not their thing, but they sound like they're from that same world. Weirdly, when you take these influences and remove certain parts of them, this is kind of what you end up with. That makes sense?
Yeah, I get that.
So, yeah, like the Pale Fountains, I vacillate between This Is Genius and This Is Boring throughout the album, sometimes within the space of a single song. The thing that is immediately apparent to me, as it has been when I've kind of listened to music by this band, is that it really, to me, it lacks an immediacy which you would think you would get based on what you've read about them. And me and you at this point in our lives, having quite a sophisticated palette in terms of music listening, you wouldn't think something like this you'd have to hear 3 or 4 times to kind of get it. But that's exactly what I did over the last few days with this album, because the first time I heard it, I was just like, this is just so tedious. I do not get it. Like, how could this possibly have got 9 out of 10?
That's my memory of trying to get into this, like having a couple of goes at it and coming to the conclusion that the songs aren't there and going and listening to something else.
Which is crazy because he's hailed as like a genius songwriter.
Yes.
But but it is if you persevere, it is actually quite rewarding. It's just it's subtle. It's not you think it's like Big Star are not subtle. Do you know what I mean? Like you hear that, like I did not have to work hard to get into their first two records when I first heard them. I immediately understood what it was that was so appealing about them, even if I did have to get over certain kind of tropes of the '70s that I was not really used to hearing as a teenager. It's like second listen, I don't care about that anymore. I love this band and these songs. They're so immediate. But this is not the case with this. After the release of this album in 1995, Shaq reformed in 1998, and in 1999 released the kind of Digger's Choice lost Britpop classic HMS Fable. This album is excellent. It's much more of an immediate listen, I think. The hooks are just so much more in your face. Um, but again, it sounds quite out of time. I feel like if that album had been released in 95, 96 with the right promotion, it could have been massive, like perhaps his kind of Stanley Road. Whereas in 1999, it's kind of already sounding like the past.
Yeah.
It's funny, in that same year, 99, NME actually put Michael Head on the cover with the headline, "This man is our greatest songwriter."
I remember that cover.
Yeah, I've seen it referred to many, many times. Interesting side note for you, Graham. HMS Fable is a favourite of James Dean Bradfield. Did you know that?
I didn't, but from what we're talking about, it does not surprise me.
Also, Noel Gallagher, big fan. He actually signed Shaq to his Sour Mash record label, which I'm sure we all remember fondly, in 2006.
Yeah, I was there every Monday, waiting for their new releases to drop.
Um, and in terms of my part of this is kind of a happy ending to close on. Is that despite these kind of misadventures, Michael Head now enjoys the commercial success that the British press feel he was owed in the last few years. He has had 2 top 10 UK albums with his current band, Michael Head and the Red Elastic Band. In 2022 with Dear Scott, and in 2024 with Loophole.
That is a real slow burn career if you're kicking off in 1981.
I mean, I saw an interview with him on Noisy by John Doran from about 8 years ago, so before all this.
Oh, was that part of that British Legends series?
That's exactly right. And one of the grimmest ending to an interview ever, where he was like saying, why is it you gave up heroin? He did, of course, say because, the romanticism kind of wears off after pretty quickly and it just becomes depressing. But one thing he did say, which was even more depressing, was that, like, I couldn't afford it.
Okay, now. So, the first piece I want to talk about in the Melody Maker this week is perhaps not in the spirit of this podcast, but we're up to episode 13. I felt like a gentle switch up was appropriate. I like the idea of challenging myself to keep this concise.
Wow. You were discussing a film review.
Yeah, they review Airplane.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue that this band do not have a major impact on the 90s. And finally, I need no excuse to be obnoxiously self-indulgent. So, without further ado, let's get into the Melody Makers' Where Are They Now profile of Husker Du.
Okay. All right.
Weren't expecting that, were you?
Yeah, I wasn't. Not in 1995.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll get into it. So, Melody Maker, this gets into establishing the key facts early. Interestingly, there is no byline attached to this piece, so I don't have a clue who wrote this. We'll rattle through those key facts then. Husker Du formed in 1979. They've got the same lineup start to finish. That lineup is guitarist and vocalist Bob Mould, drummer and vocalist Grant Hart, and bassist and occasional vocalist Greg Norton. Mould and Hart write 99% of the songs. Norton gets the occasional lead vocal and a very, very rare writing credit. They evolve rapidly from the kind of Minneapolis punk scene, from this kind of Buzzcocks-informed pop punk to very of its time post-punk, like especially Joy Division and Public Image sort of copyists. Amusingly, Ian MacKaye of Fugazi calls them out on that at the time as jumping on the post-punk bandwagon. They're not great at making friends. Fellow Minneapolis cult alt-rock ancestors, The Replacements, go so far as to have a track on their debut album called Something to Do, spelt D-U, that is a 2-minute long piss take of the Husker Du style with lyrical jabs throughout it.
I had no idea that existed.
No, me neither. Yeah, and I reading up on it last night, it was really interesting and kind of see the kind of difference between the two bands. It's fair to say that Husker Du took themselves very seriously. So they go through a sustained period of touring, supplemented with a sustained period of amphetamine use at the start of the 80s. And that sees the tempo of their songs skyrocket. So this hits a peak on their 1982 debut album, Land Speed Record, which is what I would describe as both insanely exciting and near unintelligible. It's 17 songs, it's 27 minutes long, and it is a live set recorded in the summer of 1981. From that kind of quite conventional hardcore debut, things get a lot more interesting pretty fast. The band release a mini album recorded in the studio in January 1983 called Everything Falls Apart. That comes out on the Minutemen's label called Reflex. And that starts to mix up the tempos and also includes a relatively straight ahead cover of Donovan, the swinging 60s troubadours, Sunshine Superman. That same year, they signed to SST. And in 1984, they release Zen Arcade. Zen Arcade is a kind of concept double album that mixes up hardcore, free jazz, prog, pop punk, and kind of piano balladry.
Mm.
It's a fairly consistent presence in the lower reaches of best album of all time lists. Like the canon kind of accepts that that is their high watermark. This is a good point to have a back catalogue management interlude because I know we love those.
I really do.
So, in common with all of their SST output, Zen Arcade sounds like shit. Or at the very least, it sounds like a really, really angry wasp trying to escape an empty Coke can.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can say like it was recorded on a low budget. It was recorded in 40 hours straight. Of this double album, everything but 2 tracks is first take. Like yeah, like an insanely intense, extremely chemically assisted recording session. But there's more to it than that. And this is what I think it's fair to describe at this point in time as classic SST. So Husker Du, in common with an awful lot of their peers, have been in dispute with SST regarding unpaid royalties for decades at this point.
Yeah.
What that means is that, specifically unpaid royalties, just so there's no ambiguity there.
Yeah.
What that means,
If they've been overpaying them all these years.
yeah, it's like they won the lottery or courtesy of Greg Ginn. What that means is that since the original 80s releases, SST have never remastered these recordings. And by that, I don't mean SST have never kind of rolled out the expansive box set treatment.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is that the masters that are still in circulation predate SST getting into CDs, let alone digital. So what that means is the CD copies of Husker Du's SSD albums and the DSP versions, which are available on Spotify, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms, are literally just digitized rips of the vinyl liqueur masters that were cut specifically for that format.
Okay.
In the early mid 80s, that have then been just burnt to CD, unpressed, or just stuck into a DSP. So, yeah, that is absolutely insane.
If that's not jamming econo, I don't know what is.
That's yeah, a neat summation. Really quickly, the kind of reissue / heritage institution, Numero Records, have released 2 big Husker Du box sets in the last decade. That first one, the way they got around the SST situation is that all of that material predates their signing to SST.
Okay.
So it's from like the very earliest rehearsal tapes in '79 up to live recordings from the year they signed to SST.
Okay.
Likewise, the second box set is just all live recordings from 1985. So there's no SST involvement there either.
Okay.
Anyway, following that back catalog interlude, now seems like a good time to confess that, that from about 1995 to 1998, being a big fan of this band was a significant part of my personality.
Right. I've never heard this before, Graham. Go on.
I think that fandom as personality substitute trope is not uncommon for teenage boys who are particularly immersed in music.
Yeah.
But with the benefit of time, I also think that for anyone in close proximity, that kind of artist-specific evangelism tends to have the exact opposite of the desired effect.
Yeah, I made a silent promise never to listen to this band about the age of 17.
Exactly, like, like, that sort of, like, that bug-eyed zeal, like, actively disincentivizes, like, anyone from giving the act in question a chance.
Well, okay. I mean, Sugar were very much around, like, before we were friends. Like, I'd listened to Sugar a fair bit. So and I didn't know about I didn't know about Bob Mould's past before, that sounds sinister, but
You didn't know about his crimes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd before I met you, I don't think I knew who you keep saying Husker Du. Can you tell me definitively, is it Husker Du or Husker Du? Because I thought it was Husker Du.
I cannot
I
tell
thought
you.
you just said it wrong when you were a teenager, and and it is Husker Du. I'm not trying to be a dick. I genuinely don't know because I've heard it so many different ways.
So, let's split the difference. I think that if you reference the board game they take their name from,
Hmm.
then the correct Scandinavian pronunciation, is Husker Du,
Okay.
like the way you pronounce it. And given your proximity to Scandinavian languages, like, I'm confident you're nailing the correct pronunciation.
Mhm.
However, when however, whenever I've heard the band name said by Americans, it's always Husker Du.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Fair
yeah,
enough. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's room for both. Anyway, so yeah, Zen Arcade comes out in 1984. It straight away gets the band a lot more attention on, like, a national US level and kind of beyond the sort of the punk ghetto. Interestingly, they were the first band signed to SST that were not from California. The first time SST ever looked beyond their kind of homeland. I'm sure that thought keeps them warm when they ponder their missing royalties.
Yeah, yeah.
By 1985, the band are planning their exit from SST to Warner's Records. Warner Brothers Records. A move that results in two albums. You get 1986's Candy Apple Grey and their final album, which is another double, Warehouse Songs and Stories. The production on these two albums, and to be fair, also their last SST album, Flip Your Wig, is much cleaner without going kind of full 80s. There's more and more kind of sophisticated song structure. The band are starting to get international attention off the back of Warner's support, and then everything implodes following the suicide of their manager. Someone drops Grant Hart's bottle of methadone before a show, and the tension that's been threatening to swallow the band whole for at least 5 years finally wins. They break up at the start of 1988, and after a handful of solo albums between them, Mould forms Sugar and enjoys a spell of commercial success in the UK and Europe, and Hart forms Nova Mob, who get absolutely screwed when Rough Trade goes bust just as their debut album is released.
Classic rough trade story.
Yeah, repeated every decade.
Yeah.
So the timing of what is, to be generous, a pretty functional article is interesting.
Yeah. What tell me about this article? Yeah.
Well, this is it. Like, we're at, we're at or approaching the apex of Britpop, but, like, I don't know, melody maker's gonna melody maker. So it runs a piece on one of the bands acknowledged as the architects of 90s US alt rock. I think when you start to kind of add it up, that influence is, like, undeniable. So when the Pixies are trying to recruit a bassist, Kim Deal answers an ad for bass player into the 60s bubblegum group Peter, Paul and Mary and Husker Du. Green Day, who came up in that late 80s kind of afterglow, sort of kind of like early sort of mall punk, have covered the lead single from Candy Apple Grey, Don't Wanna Know If You're Lonely, fairly frequently. That song is probably the closest the band have to a calling card. When it was released as a single in the UK, it somewhat unbelievably hit the top 40.
Wow. Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, like
amazing. Yeah.
there's a really well-worn bootleg of the band playing, at what's now Coco in Camden, and, like, they have sold it out. Like, that is a big, like, energized crowd.
Oh, amazing.
And yeah, they're an acknowledged influence on a myriad of acts. To take just a handful, like Nirvana, My Bloody Valentine, Therapy, Foo Fighters, The Hold Steady.
Well, we talked about shoegaze last week. I mean, they're kind of a key component of that, the influences that go into that, right?
Yeah, big time. Bob Mould's kind of guitar pyrotechnics like definitely inform a fair bit of shoegaze. But yeah, like I said, at the time of this piece, we're at like maximum Union Jack chimney sweep stuff.
Mhm.
Both Sugar and Nova Mob have split up in 1995. And the bands that were influenced by Husker Du, like audibly, are either, have either split, they're falling from grace, or they're years from breaking through. So this brings me on to my kind of my closing question. They've become this kind of archetype of record collector alt rock, a kind of clear component of like the six music dad canon. They've got a status as an important band you probably haven't heard of. So to wrap up, are Husker Du actually that influential? Because despite that list of acts that have kind of conceded an influence, there's still, as the punchline says, an important band you probably haven't heard of. And I think where I land on this is that they're representative of an 80s US underground, which as an overall sound was incredibly influential in the early 90s. But that very broad 80s underground rock scene probably has three pillars from a US perspective. You got Husker Du, you've got the Replacements, and you've got REM. Right? The Replacements are a messy band with a messy discography and a general vibe of chaos. Like their career, um, considering they're from the same city, as I said earlier, they're both from Minneapolis. Their careers run pretty much parallel, including the major label deal timing. But I think with the Replacements, you see the kind of cost of trading amphetamines for alcohol as your band's kind of preferred vice is a corresponding lack of focus. Like, there's a big Replacements reissue campaign going on at the moment, and a lot of it is very sort of interested in kind of restoring albums to their original intention.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on the REM side, REM also spend a lot of time running in parallel, like to Husker Du in the early kind of part of their career. But they have the great advantage, and we've talked about this before, of much more settled group dynamics. The publishing credits are split four ways equally,
Yeah, yeah.
whereas separate songwriting credits was an early Husker Du schism that was instigated by Mold. Like he kicked off very early, like these are my songs, those are your songs.
What year is REM signed to Warner versus the year that Husker Du is signed to Warner?
We'll come to it.
Okay.
For REM, like any kind of substance abuse is seemingly way more low key and benign. Their work ethic, like 6 years, six albums, constant touring, is insane. And the focus on a sophisticated career strategy compared to certainly the Replacements and to a degree Husker Du is striking. So they retain complete creative control throughout their career. And when they sign to a major, so REM signed to Warner's in 87, like nearly 2 years after Husker Du signed to Warner's, it's because they think they're ready for increased international support, like not because they want a big paycheck. Their strategy for signing, REM's strategy for signing to Warner's is our current label, IRS, lacks the kind of the firepower to get us out into international markets. Like if we can retain the creative control and, I'm sure a favorable royalty rate and a great advance, and we get the resources for like international exposure, that's going to step us up a gear. So all of that means that they're the group that become the huge success stories out of this kind of scene. But huge success stories aren't particularly great bedfellows for the kind of for the myth building or the construction of discerning taste.
Yeah, yeah.
So because of their relative lack of success, probably I think like in more recent years compounded by what was at first a refusal to reform. And then after Grant Hart died in 2017, like the impossibility of ever reforming, they're kind of enshrined as the textbook example of an important band you probably haven't heard of. Where I think they have an incredibly direct influence is the evolution of post-hardcore into emo in the 90s. If they're often referred to as like the godfathers of grunge, then Husker Du are absolutely the grandfathers of emo. But to truly dig into emo, we'd have to get into the 2000s, and that's not for this season.
As I mentioned earlier, this week cover stars are Radiohead. They have the main feature in this week's NME, going from pages 26 to 28, um, entitled "Boom, Shake the Gloom." Uh, it's pretty funny.
I'm picturing Tom York's face while you read that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's covering it. He's got his head in his hands. So in the main photo, Radiohead are interviewed on tour by Andy Richardson in 2025. We're used to Radiohead having what Stephen Hayden described in his book about Kid A. This isn't happening. You read that?
You know what? I haven't. I
Okay,
like.
pretty good.
I'm always a bit suspicious about Radiohead books because I'm never sure how good their access is.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, but they're a kind of well storied, reported on band, and that's kind of what they're drawing on. Yeah, it's full of kind of hot takes and putting things in context. But yeah, it's a good book. It's worth reading. It's breezy. He describes. There's an excellent phrase in there he uses for Radiohead, where he describes them as having "fuck you" credibility, as opposed to "fuck you" money, which surely they also have at this point. They've kind of they've entered the world of artists like, when we were growing up, like David Bowie and the Velvet Underground, which are kind of pilloried by some who were there at the time with kind of on the ground context. But they basically occupy an unmovable position in the credibility Hall of Fame. Would you begrudgingly agree with that?
Yeah, I've actually heard this discussed somewhere else about that "fuck you" credibility idea. But I think I also think it's undeniable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whatever as I said, if you were there, you would have different opinions about it. But if you were born if you were born 26 years ago or something, you would think of them like we thought about, maybe not the Velvet Underground, but you get what I'm saying. In 1995, obviously, they're in a very different position. They're touring their second album, The Bends, which was released in March of 1995. The sixth and last song to be released as a single from the album, Street Spirit Fade Out, which is also the closing track on the album, will be released a little over a month later in January 1996. Closest to this interview, however, is the release of the song Lucky, which you may or may not remember, appeared on the Help album
Yeah.
in September 1995, which is a various artists' charity album released to raise money for war orphans in Bosnia. And that track would also end up on their third album, OK Computer. They are heavily framed in this piece as Britpop outsiders. Actually, probably a better way of putting that is they're hailed as Britpop outsiders. Andy Richardson asked the question, the most important British band of 1995? It could well be Radiohead. He goes on to argue that in 1995, most bands sought solace in an unreal world, in a Prozac and intoxication-addled world of rose-tinted Englishness. Lyrics were filled with fantastic falsehoods, and few dared to mirror the ideas and failings of a disaffected generation, except Radiohead. Yeah, super interesting on the ground context there, I think. Radiohead famously was successful in the US first, then the UK. The song Creep taking off there before it did here. That at this time, and now, to be honest, I think it just kind of goes back to what you're saying about REM. They seem to me like a very hard-working band. In the early 90s, they were a kind of studious indie band with U2 aspirations. And despite a wary, fractious relationship with the record label and the promotional part of their job, um, they had a grind set mindset. They're putting in the hours in the studio, and they're certainly putting in the miles on the road with touring and promotion. How this fits in culturally in 1995 with them being a British band is that they're not louche Britpop cool. They're a hard-working touring band, recording obsessively, taking promotion seriously, even when it's tense and miserable, as documented famously in Grant G's Meeting People is Easy film about the touring of OK Computer. They're also not Britpop ambitious in the same way as, say, Blur or Pulp. They're not courting celebrity. I think having success in the US beyond an alternative radio hit took persistence and not posture. They're kind of eventually sold on substance rather than the kind of one-hit wonder posers, of Creep era.
I, I I find the perception shift from the kind of one-hit wonder grunge bandwagon jumper sort of
Mm,
thing from Creep
yep.
to the Bends being like, hang on, this could be the album of the year.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, that's a really interesting transition. And
Absolutely.
like, even though I was kind of around at the time, I'm still not clear on how it happened.
Yeah, I think hard work and obstinance.
Mm.
I think they felt about Creep and Pablo Honey in like this doesn't represent us, and we haven't really had a chance to get music down the way we want it to be. This is, I think they kind of Pablo Honey is instantly referred to them as kind of like their demo. People talk about the years of bad writing you have to get out of your system in order to be a successful writer or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
I think that was kind of what they did. But yeah, it was interesting at the time, and it's interesting now. They've sidestepped the arc of, UK band win over UK press, gain success, assume the world will care, arrive in America and sulk when nobody does. They've kind of gone the reverse of that. Of course, they did get kind of rapturous press in the UK weeklies and beyond when they first arrived. They were kind of famous for being a support band that blew the headliners off the stage. But this was not the springboard to success. It was Creep's success in America was. And now, 2 albums in, the kind of hard work graft has paid off in the commercial success, and combined with the hard work craft is paying off in the critical success of the Bends in the UK. Interestingly, when I went back and looked at them, the reviews in the US were quite divisive on the Bends, drawing some kind of quite illogical hatred. They were basically, it's like, this album's not enough like Pablo Honey. I don't, I don't hear a creep on here. Like, basically was. uh,
I'm pretty sure some of the US singles, like maybe the US versions of like Fake Plastic Trees or High and Dry, have like lots of sort of glossy string overdubs
really?
for US. Yeah, like either that happened and then the band like put their foot down and were like, we are not doing this,
Yeah.
or it happened, they got released to no response in the US and the band swore we will never do this again.
Yeah, maybe. All I know for sure is that the album success in the US was slow burn.
Mm.
As the singles trickled out and word of mouth was happening, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Whereas here it was an immediate kind of critical and commercial success. People were like up for this record. So yeah, so unlike other UK bands at the time, their contemporaries, they kind of have this built-in global audience. They're not looking forever inwards to the UK. They're a Britpop anomaly, basically, in this year, in both the space they occupy in the market and the content and style of their music. Yet Richardson is referring to them as possibly the most important British band of 1995. In a normal Britpop week, you might expect that to be, which indie band is dominating the charts, who is the most Britpop stylistically, who's defining the era, basically. But by completely ignoring and being, frankly, like outside of the kind of what he described as the Prozac and intoxication addled world of rose tinted Englishness, they are, this sounds a bit pretentious, but they're defining kind of the emotional truth of the moment. Do you know what I mean? Not who's selling this fantasy best. This might seem quite revisionist, but uh, it's right there in the article. Do you know what I mean? It's fascinating that this is the way they're being framed,
Yeah.
like straight away.
It's interesting, like, how kinda the framing of them as, like, the miserablists at in the corner of the party saying, "This is all bullshit," is quite interesting. That feels more OK Computer relevant than the Benz relevant.
Yeah, but we're going to get to that. The miserablists at the party. I think when I spoke about the emotional truth, I think what I'm thinking of here really is another line that he says. He says, while Oasis sing of champagne supernovas, the Bends described torturous isolation and despair. And your thing that you just said about them being kind of, the grumpy people in the corner of the party, there's also kind of a running theme through the article about them rejecting the kind of hedonism of the Britpop era. He goes on to say they keep a healthy distance from the hedonistic excesses of Britpop and refuse to indulge in the cocaine binges, chic heroin habits, and brash arrogance of their contemporaries, which of course, and I think this is what you're referring to perhaps, kind of is something that Radiohead famously address in a line from the song Karma Police, which is about an encounter with Elasticus Justine Frischmann, where she kind of humiliates him at a party. And, he sings, Karma Police, arrest this girl. Her Hitler hairdo is making me feel ill, and we have crashed her party. I also just, it's funny. I mean, he also has the last laugh. He's probably created as much generational wealth as Justine Frischmann is enjoying. So yeah.
It's interesting to me. Like I think I've said before, my position on Radiohead is broadly that they are a band that I think are immensely impressive, but quite hard to love. And this phase in particular, like I feel like Tom York is still trying to have his cake and eat it a bit.
Hmm.
Like, kind of like, yes, there is this sort of kind of cold, hard truths approach to the lyrics and sort of like ennui and despair vibe. But like, this is a guy still pretty committed to being a rock star. Like,
100%.
describe the front cover of your enemy.
Are you looking at an image of it right now?
I'm not, but I remember it pretty clearly. Like, I don't want to preempt you, but I'm pretty sure he is wrapped in a fur coat wearing shades.
No, 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 no. He's not. He's not.
Ah, shit.
He,
All right. That scuppers that then.
he's wearing a yellow jacket. Underneath, he's wearing a very kind of who gives a shit kind of champion t-shirt, like blue champion t-shirt.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I've confused it with a different cover and it renders my point completely fucking bullshit.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not really. I think they go. You have. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about the influence of U2 on Radiohead, but also there's the influence of Queen. Do you know what I mean? There's
The Queen thing's massive.
exactly. They really go in for all that. So and yeah, their ambition means that it's like surely the ultimate goal for these songs, whether the ones on Pablo Honey or the Bends, is to go into like a massive stadium and play these songs to like tens of thousands of people. I mean, that's kind of what those songs are designed for, surely. And then obviously when you get there and you do have that kind of fan base, then of course you're going to be put under the press microscope. Do you know what I mean? And there's going to be huge amounts of pressure. But I think rather than that their kind of sense of self getting lost in a fug of kind of drugs and excess, their sense of self kind of gets lost in a fug of kind of ambition and just scrabbling up that hill as fast as as fast as they can, trying to make the music as good as possible and trying to sell it as well, in the way they think is best. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where you get to these kind of contradictions that you're talking about. But, uh, I mean, it's a bit of a cop out. You could say this for any of these bands. They're all in their kind of early to mid 20s. Like they don't know, they don't want what they want until it comes. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's just, they're too busy, going for the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing.
I feel like that is an interesting tension with Radiohead in particular because that desire to ascend the greasy pole
Yeah.
is like is very clear, but at the same time, like there is a genuine commitment to like kind of like creative expression, like and a real desire to not compromise that.
Yeah. So I wrote, they're here for a long time, not a good time. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like Johnny
Yeah, yeah,
Greenwood, there's a quote from him where he says, I'm sure we'd probably all be much happier and better party monsters if we indulged in Class A drugs. but we probably self-destruct 6 months down the line. That's just not what they're about. They're just, their ambition is to create like a solid body of meaningful work.
Yeah, I don't think Radiohead, any of their members, were ever pictured at the Met Bar.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, they were such an interesting band at the time. I remember they felt big and different. The jump in quality from Pablo Honey to the Bends to OK Computer was something that I noticed and discussed with friends. I can't really think of any other band that had such an undeniable arc that was so big at the time. I mean, I can remember hearing My Iron Lung for the first time on Radio 1, and it being announced as the new, this is from the new Radiohead album, and it was, like, super exciting.
Is it My Iron Lung where it's a live recording and they just overdub the vocals later on?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd swear with My Iron Lung, like, they were super happy with the take that was part of a live video they released at the end of the Pablo Honey cycle.
Okay.
And when they heard it, they were like, "Yeah, that's the track. We just need to, like, tighten up the vocal take." And so they did.
I think famously that was what Creep was. I think Creep is like they released, like, a first kind of run through, but they're being recorded without them knowing it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, like, the whole, like, Johnny Greenwood guitar skronk is him sort of warming up, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Yeah, the chunk ka-chunk or whatever. Yeah, and just to kind of bring this to a close, I think for those like yourself that didn't really like the Bends at the time, I really get it. I mean, these might not be your reasons, but like, I think already liking them was already starting to seem mandatory. And at its heart, it's quite a cheesy, riff-tastic, Queen aping traditional rock record.
100%.
They are definitely wearing their U2 big boy pants on this album as well. And listening back to it this week, the album track "Bulletproof I Wish I Was" seems to single-handedly be responsible for Travis's second album career onwards. It's quite amazing.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's like yeah. But I think it's excellent, and more importantly, as we have already discussed, it is excellent fun, the album.
Yeah, I think, when we got to it in the best of 95 list, I really, really enjoyed it. Like, I still don't get Street Spirit, but perhaps that means I'm broken.
Yeah.
But the rest of the album is like, yeah, it's just a good, slightly preposterous rocking time. So, my second article I want to talk about this week is a David Frick helmed deep dive on the history of UK acts trying to break the US since the Beatles did so, like right up to the what for him is the present, so December 95. David Frick at this point has recently left Rolling Stone as their music editor in the US, and I think in the intervening period, he's kind of gone on to become a renowned pop historian these days. So, yeah, his box set liner notes are invariably excellent. The article kicks off with a quote each from our cover stars. There's Damon Albarn apologising for being a bit slack, and there's Liam Gallagher kind of clumsily attempting to bait a crowd by informing them that this one's called Up Your Bum.
Yeah.
Um, like stuff like that seems shit at the time. It's only got worse with age.
Although, do you know what? He can be quite amusing, and I don't know if you saw ASAP Rocky on Fallon last week, but Liam Gallagher still got it, referring to him as WhatsApp Ricky.
The consistency's not there, but like when he hits the mark, it's still quite amusing.
Yeah,
I don't know. Podcasters in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
absolutely. Yeah,
So yeah, those quotes set the scene, and David Frick goes on to bemoan both the Blur and the Oasis shows, that recently passed through New York. He complains about the kind of on Oasis' part, like largely Liam and his sort of aggressive disinterest in catering to an American audience. And he also talks about Blur and the visible kind of gap in enthusiasm for them from having kind of ascended like the peaks of success in the UK, and then the realization that they've got to start grinding it all out again in the
Yeah,
US.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That's contrasted with Elastica coming over and playing the Mercury Lounge and going down incredibly well. Supergrass and Echo Belly have both been in New York for what are described as kind of high energy club shows. And the highlight of 1995's CMJ conference that we talked about last week, the highlight of the 95 supporting gigs is apparently Skunk and Nancy making a major impression.
Not Carter USM.
Yeah. I'm not sure they were invited in 1995. As a one of the quotes that really leapt out at me from the writer himself is this: "Yet there remains a world of difference. Britpop is not our pop, and in the US is met with cult sales and mainstream indifference." Maybe it's the benefit of hindsight, but right now, like, my reaction to that statement is like, "Well, yeah, of course." Like, you're stripping out all the pomp and circumstance of like a cultural moment in its home territory. You're transplanting it to the US, and it's an uphill struggle to kinda sell these bands purely on their music in the face of a super active, US marketplace. So before we get into some more detailed analysis of that, like, what was your perception of UK bands going over to the US? Like, did you particularly care, or I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but because we have our trope from episode 1 onwards of you being more receptive to US alt rock,
Yeah.
were were you just like, "This is a distraction, why would I care? There's a ton of interesting US artists to consider."
I enjoyed being all in on whatever scene was right in front of our faces, like, at that age. Like, I thought it was exciting to be into things that were relevant in the now, do you know what I mean? And thinking about I was a bit like, trained on the UK music weeklies. You're kinda trained to just be very excited about new stuff, and then as it starts to seem a bit like you need to dispose of it quickly, like, after about, 8 to 10 months or something. So I think it's safe to say in 1995, I was all in on British music and British bands. I think another trope, but by this point, I'd already read many, many articles about UK bands being in America and how hard it was to break America. Like that was just an established part of your kind of music journalism diet was some band that some kind of B, C tier level indie band playing to nobody in the middle of America, nobody caring, and they have to suffer the indignity of showing enthusiasm to industry professionals. Do you know what I mean? Um, that part of it I found grating even as a child. Like I thought this seems like part of your job and you should just do it with a smile on your face, as best you can. Like thi- this seems to betray the the values of our country. Do you know what I mean? I don't like you're supposed to be
Not to criticize your choice of wording, but you just kneecapped one of the points I was about to make with that statement.
well, it's just it just seems impolite. I don't know. Like I'm sure that it's tiring, but at the same time, you know, just suck it up.
Boy, have I got a quote for you later on. It's interesting, like, I'm not attempting to, like, kinda paint us as some sort of, like, kinda like teenage proto wokerati, but, like, the idea that, like, us or our friendship group, like, in 1995 would be like, "Yeah, get over there and show them how it's done." Like,
Yeah.
British music is best is, like,
Yeah.
fucking absurd. Like
Uh, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
that just wouldn't have registered. I mean, and to to that end, like, I definitely know what you mean about the kind of the way you educate yourself as a reader of the weeklies about the dominant narrative of UK bands going to the US.
Hmm.
Like, you know, it always seemed like this is the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, equal narrative. I mean, we are looking at the enemy and melody maker, so we're hyper focused on indie rock. But the big genre in global pop culture from like early '90s onwards is hip hop. You know, and an equal trope is reading interviews with hip hop artists in the UK music press where they're they're either just passing through through Europe and really do not care about what's going on in the UK
Yeah,
or
yeah.
anywhere else outside of America, frankly. Those are the kind of bedfellows of kind of music weekly cliches that seem to go well together.
Yeah, maybe that's a project for another episode. A qualitative analysis of the utter indifference of US hip hop acts talking to the UK press
Yeah, yeah,
versus
yeah.
Britpop acts talking to the US
Yeah,
press.
so Public Enemy seem to be so engaged. Now what's happened?
So, like I said, almost seemed kind of self-evident that most of this stuff would go over poorly. Like, coming back to that kind of like that late 95 kind of peak Britpop cheeky Cockney thing, that's intrinsically a niche interest in the US. But also I think by this point, from Enemy and Melody Maker, like also earlier on from like reading stuff like Kerrang, like the scale of the task at hand seemed enormous. Like America is huge, and the way to crack it is to like go out there and consistently tour. So anyway, David Frick gets into some stats about like kind of great British hopes and how things are going for them at this point in 1995. So when this article is published, what's the story? Morning Glory is 119 on the Billboard top 200 album charts, and that's 3 weeks after a release on Epic Records, the Sony imprint, with a significant promotional push. He contrasts that with Blur, although I'm not sure contrast is the right word, but where Blur have been active in the US for longer, it makes for some pretty interesting reading. So, Blur's debut album, Leisure, sold 100 to 105,000 copies by 1995 in the UK.
Hmm.
That compares to its US sales of circa 95,000 copies. Obviously, like the US is a much, much, much bigger territory, but in terms of raw sale numbers, that is surprisingly evenly matched.
Well, they have a hit, don't they?
Well, yeah, exactly. Like,
That's been remixed for radio.
also, interestingly, the piece gives some context on that kind of initial Blur in the US impact, in that Blur get lumped in with shoegaze.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they've got almost a package holiday tour they can get onto college radio with.
yeah. Swerve Driver.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Leisure gets off to a pretty good start. Park Life is down a bit. That does 87,000 copies in the US.
I'm assuming Modern Life is rubbish. It doesn't even register.
Yeah, we don't talk about
Yeah, okay.
that. I left that out my notes because it was so low. It was more like
Okay.
the Park Life examples more prescient.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, Park Life does 87,000 copies in the US. But in the UK, and again, this is only by December of 95, it does in excess of 900,000 copies. And then, of course, you have The Great Escape, which debuts on the top 200 Billboard album chart at 150 and then disappears, never to be seen again. Just going back to Oasis briefly, there's a really interesting bit of historical context here that I don't think I was aware of. I did know that the first single from What's the Story Morning Glory in the US was the title track,
Yeah, yeah.
which was never released as a single elsewhere. But that choice of single, it's pointed out that US radio hated it.
Really?
Yeah, they were really, really anti the track. They just felt that this is not what we were expecting after Live Forever.
Okay.
Where's the kind of the love and the hugs,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, that choice of that track as the lead single, like basically made the What's the Story Morning Glory rollout in the US like a real uphill struggle because radio just did not get behind the first single.
Yeah, which should have been Wonderwall in hindsight, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, almost certainly. Or maybe Don't Look Back in Anger. Like, it's so Lennon-y.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah.
You could run with that in the US. There's another band, though, that Oasis and Blur are compared to, and their strategy is highlighted as being, like, the where the smart money goes, and that's Radiohead. They reference Radiohead taking the support slot on REM's Monster tour in the US, and what a game changer that is for them. You talked before about the bends, kind of like, having these sort of like huge, soaring, like big rock songs designed for stadiums. Radiohead get to play them in that context
Yeah,
because on the Monster US tour, they are like consistently playing to like 20,000 cap venues. Whereas Blur and Oasis, who are over there trying to kind of, like spin up a profile, like almost from like ground zero, right? They are playing venues with like 1,500 to 2,000 people in
yeah.
them. A great quote that I've dying to mention on your Radiohead segment, but I had to save for now. This is from Tom York talking about specifically like kind of like this US approach. It's a different mentality in America. Being nice to people, basically kissing ass, is so un-English, but you have to do it. If you go in there thinking you're God's gift, you've had it. That's like, I mean, he's correct, but it's also like a really surprisingly like kind of brazen careerist statement.
Yeah, I think possibly where Oasis got away with it was because people did found them unintelligible. Like,
Yeah,
Americans famously suffer with any accent beyond any Northern English accent, basically.
yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I always forget kind of like what a northern or a Scottish accent will do to American ears.
Well, although it's weird because they obviously it wasn't a problem for the Beatles.
Correct, you mentioned them. So Frick goes on to compare and contrast the circumstances for Beatlemania and like the contemporary market. So he points out that during Beatlemania and then the kind of the follow-on British invasion, there's a very specific set of circumstances which kind of created unrealistic expectations for UK acts from that point on.
Yeah.
Like, you've got two things. Like, culturally, you've got the aftershock of the Kennedy assassination. You've also got the fact that US pop music, like, aside from kind of, like Spectre, Phil Spector's kind of productions, it's basically in a bit of a slump. Like, there's not a whole lot going on beyond Spectre and, like, some of the, like, early Beach Boys stuff. And then you add to that the fact that you have these British groups who are coming over who have seen the Beatles blaze this trail for the first time, and they are up for it. Like, not to get sidetracked into socioeconomics, but if you think about a lot of those Britbeat and British invasion groups, they're predominantly from kind of post-war working class backgrounds. And all of a sudden, like, there is a clear path to like completely changing your life circumstances by
Yeah,
playing music. Like, you're
yeah,
going to run for that.
yeah.
And that persists into like the 70s and 80s as well. So fundamentally, breaking the US, like we've talked about repeatedly for this, like requires like absolute commitment and real kind of grinding hard work. So Frick points out that Led Zeppelin spent best part of a year going around the US in support of acts like Iron Butterfly and Vanilla Fudge, the sort of proto heavy metal US groups. He then points out that the Clash, after they'd recorded and released London Calling, like in like 79, 80, they basically relocated to the US for the best part of 3 years. Yeah, they were coming back to the UK, but their focus was on recording in the US and touring in the US. There's also some context on how the US industry perceives the UK, and basically that's as utterly obsessed with fads.
Yeah.
For every new UK scene that rolls through, like, you know what? If it doesn't feel like it's an instant success, then it doesn't matter because something new is going to come through in 6 months' time.
If not 6 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, there is the contemporary, like US context. Like Frick mentions things like the OJ Simpson trial, like, and it's follow on from like the LA riots, like the Oklahoma far right bombing. what he refers to as this kind of systematic rollback of kind of liberal democracy and economic guardrails. Like there's a lot happening in kind of early to mid '90s like US culture. Right. And there is, there is like fertile ground for US artists to speak to those concerns
Mm,
and those circumstances. And if you consider all that, and then Damon Albarn rocks up with some like sneery critiques of suburban UK, like you can't expect that to get much traction. The thing to consider with like three of the acts I've mentioned previously is that ultimately they do crack it to varying degrees of success.
yeah.
After that Monster tour, Radiohead then go on to support Alanis Morissette, and they kind of continue refining their approach to like big stages and communicating with big crowds. So it's kind of insane to think that by the time OK Computer drops, they have road tested that material like on Alanis Morissette audiences.
Yeah.
Like, they've really sort of like, however kind of potentially challenging and creatively inventive that material is, it's also been tried out on a much more sort of middle of the road audience. That's reflected by the fact that OK Computer enters the Billboard album chart at 21 and sets them up for kind of continued success in the US, like to this day.
Yeah.
That same year, in 1997, Blur released their fifth album, self-titled album. The promo campaign around that has a very self-conscious kind of angle of like, we've been much more influenced by American alternative music this time.
The incredible about face at the time, that was staggering.
The fucking whiplash.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. We'll be getting into it, but yeah.
It's like, I've dropped Chaz and Dave and I've got really into Slint.
Yeah.
Anyway, Blur's fifth album features Song 2. That track peaks at 55 on the Billboard Hot 100. And to this day, Song 2 is an absolutely kind of like, it's just seeped into the fabric of the culture at American sports events.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's huge.
And then finally, Oasis take the long way round. There's a whole bunch more kind of controversies and setbacks during their initial career run in the US. And yet, despite all of that, the LA leg of last year's Oasis reunion tour was an incredible, enormous success. Multiple sold out nights, rapturous reception from US crowds and critics for probably the first time in their careers. Like, Oasis have never been bigger in the US than they are now.
I was going to say that, which is so weird. Bigger now than they ever were.
Yeah, I did not have that on my bingo card. Like, that's a crazy outcome. Are there any UK acts from this era you're surprised didn't crack the US? Like, are there people you were like, yeah, that would have been massive in the US, like, and yet it wasn't?
The other big UK act to break in America in this period is Prodigy. I would say they seem like it's kind of significant. I mean, they had a number one album in the US, so it's like they almost do better than any of these acts contemporaneously.
Yeah, I mean, that's my closing remark, basically. Like, however volatile the kind of like and unpredictable the opportunities for UK bands were, like, you have to remember that within like 18 months of this in 1997, that's such a huge breakthrough year for this idea of electronica as a genre, and particularly the Chemical Brothers and like the Prodigy.
Fatboy Slim as well. Fatboy Slim does a
Yeah. Like, Fat of a Land goes to number one on the Billboard album chart. Dig Your Own Hole flies off shelves like well over a year after release. And like, and I think it's safe to say that electronica movement is the kind of true 90s British invasion. I feel like this is almost like part one of a series, like not so much in terms of the article, but in terms of what we're discussing. Like, I I hope at some point we get to talk about that electronica boom in the US with British acts. Like, because I'm really curious to dig into how it was reported at the time. But I'm equally curious to try and understand how Americans perceive that from the perspective of 26.
Next week, we travel back to 1998 for deep dives on Beastie Boys versus The Prodigy, Belle and Sebastian, Hole, and the Beach Boys.
In the meantime, you can find us on the socials and most of the usual places. That's Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all under the Analog Slop name. That's all one word and spelt ANALOGUESLOP. However, if you prefer your podcasts to involve static pictures, we are also on YouTube. That channel is youtube.com at ANALOGUE slop. And finally, if you want to send us an email, we're reachable predictably on analogslop@gmail.com.